Yes, thank you. So I'm going to present this joint work with Stefano Battistone and Irene Monasterolo, which to a certain extent dates back from 2 years already, but there's a continuous flow of work. So I'll give kind of not a general introduction to the topic, but put forward more, let's say, maybe conceptual issues on this issue of stress testing that we started to look at in 2017. And I'll give you the references at the end. And illustrate these general ideas by a few of the analyses we've made, the empirical analysis we've made of transition risk in on real data. So you see, that's not a good idea. Okay, so let's see if this works. Okay. So what's the issue? The issue is since 5 years there is concern, of 10 years there is concern among financial regulators about risks related to climate change, right? This starts to a certain extent from a talk from Mark Carney, who was the governor of the Bank of England, who was saying, okay, climate change is endangering financial stability, given that the memories of the financial crisis of 2007, 2008 are relatively fresh, people feel pretty much concerned about this type of issues. So there are 2 points to start with, if you want. The first point is that there is recognition, or there is the belief, if you want, that there is issues related to climate change, and this is going to be mitigation and impacts. There are potential financial damages. That's the opinion of the regulator, let's say. And there is a second point, which is in fact fundamental from the point of view of financial actors, or from the point of view of the regulator, is that the regulator thinks that the market or the financial actors do not take that into account as of today, right? So in more financial parlance, you would say that asset valuation is not pricing properly this risk as of today. If this were, and this is the fundamental issue to a certain extent. Okay, so what are we talking about? We are talking about those 2 types of risks that were mentioned in the previous talk. So in fact, this is impacts and this is mitigation, but they framed it in this term of transition and physical risk. Transition risk is the risk on financial assets induced by climate policy, or mitigation, if you wish. And physical risk are a potential risk for financial actors or financial assets related to impacts. This is always an economic concern, or this is always a policy concern. This becomes a concern for financial regulators a priori if the risk is not properly accounted for. Okay, and given the way risk management works in the financial industry today, which is mostly based on risk models calibrated on historical data, and the data here are asset values, this risk is not accounted for by financial actors if they are not priced, or if the price of financial assets, this risk is not reflected by the historical price of financial assets, right? And so that's the working assumption throughout, right? If this is not true, well, if the financial actors are aware of the risk and the prices are, or the risk is priced in financial assets, a priori, there is no concern for financial regulators. There is a policy concern, okay, and there's an economic policy concern, but it's not a concern for financial regulators. The market works. But the assumption is that the market doesn't work. So why would the market not work in this respect? Is also because of that, right? A priori, you never had a very large implementation of very stringent and rapid climate policy. That's about transition risk. And you, for the moment, okay, so then maybe that's more controversial, you in terms of physical risk, you didn't have the giant catastrophe, at least in terms of asset value, that could be called a systemic physical risk or shock. Okay, but if you focus still on transition risk, given that in your if your historical data of asset prices, you don't have the shock, well, and basically given the financial model work, you assume that the distribution are stationary. Okay, you're calibrating or you're calibrating a model using stationary distribution of shocks, so in which there is no climate shocks. It's not in your risk management framework. Okay, so what you want to do, in fact, is to add that dimension of risk, which is not in the historical data, so it's a bit problematic because you don't have real observational data, but still you need to do something for risk management if you think that it's a concern in terms of risk. So in a very schematic way, you have the conventional practice of risk management in the financial industry, in which, okay, you know that the values of asset is well, risky, so you have, let's say, an expectation and you have some variance or some risk around that expectation. You know how to manage those risks, basically, or you can measure those risks on the basis of historical data. The main element is the volatility of the assets, okay, in terms of quotes. But you don't have the climate risk, that's our working assumption, so you need to add a part, so you need to complete this assessment by trying to add to this distribution of risk some estimate of what could be climate risk from the point of view of asset values. Okay, so this, I guess you all know that. So where these risks come from, if you talk about transition risk, this comes mainly from the uncertainty that you have about climate policy, so which climate policy is going to be prevailing, and also to the uncertainty about the economic impacts of this or that climate policy, for which, for example, we didn't talk specifically about uncertainty, but the uncertainty about policy translates into an uncertainty about impacts, and as Michael commented upon, given that you don't have perfect certainty that you have a correct model of the assessment of future economic trajectory under different policy scenarios, you also have uncertainty related, to the model and to your capacity of assessing a future economic trajectory. Okay, so you want to assess those risks, right? And then our approach is conceptually, it's relatively, it's the standard approach to risk assessment, except that you need to implement it in a context where you really have few empirical data on the actual risk you are targeting. Right, so you have three dimensions. The risk is what's your exposition, what kind of hazards are you facing, and once the hazard materializes, what's your vulnerability. Here the vulnerability means for the financial assets, what's the vulnerability to the shocks. Okay, so, and what's in a nutshell our interpretation or the interpretation of these three dimensions of these three factors in the context of financial transition risk? Well, the exposition is you need to identify which assets are subject to transition risk. So you need to define, this is a kind of filtering exercise or classification exercise. What are assets because of their sectoral affiliation, their economic sectors, and maybe because of their nature in terms of asset or financial asset, long term, short term, etc., which assets are exposed. Then you need to identify hazards, and ideally you want a distribution of probability that captures the hazards. Here, the hazard is roughly the timing and the intensity of the climate policy, right? On one end, and also, so that's the policy uncertainty, and there is the economic uncertainty, which is what's going to be then the sectoral and geographical distribution impacts of the different policy. And last element, the vulnerability. Well, the vulnerability would say, given the realization of certain economic impacts, what is going to be the consequence of this on the value of certain financial assets, or if you have a more broader perspective, on the balance sheet of a financial institution, or if you have an even broader perspective, on a financial stability within a given system. Okay? So then the issue is, well, this I knew it was going to somehow, okay, let's see, outside that. It was going somehow to up, okay. So then you need to fill up all this. So you have a relatively clear workflow, and you need to address all the issues, right? And then it's becoming more of an engineering or an artisanal problem to a certain extent, at least at this stage, than a very applied problem than a purely, even financial or economic issue. Okay, so first, exposure. So exposure, if you think that you really want to implement this kind of risk management models or this risk assessment in the context of climate policy, well, it's going to be large scale because you are talking about assessing the portfolio of a bank which might have, millions of loans to to not only very large corporation, right, but to a small corporation for which you don't have, for example, public information about the activities, etc. So what you need to rely on at the end of the day is some statistical type of information about the firm and some statistical classification of the firm. The issue is that the statistical classification that is used, basically the NACE, is not fit for the purpose because it has not been designed at the time where climate policy or climate change was such an important issue. And thus, well, if you want, given the current classification scheme, to identify what are assets that are exposed to climate change on the basis of this statistical information, you have a hard time. So basically one of the things we have done is to go through the NACE classification in details and then identify at different levels of aggregation, okay, filtering out what would be sectors that could be exposed to climate policy. It's just a taxonomic effort, so to say, that we have done at various levels of disaggregation. First, and if you go at the broader level, okay, you have 5 sectors, which are fossil fuels, utility, energy-intensive industry, housing, and transport, which together roughly represent 40% of the economy. And then we can keep on going over the years trying to refine this classification, looking at this classification at higher level of granularity. Okay, and then on this basis, well, you can classify. So you basically, the type of exercise you want to do is to take a portfolio of assets, and first thing you quantify which part is exposed, right? So here, that's something that Irene and Stefano mostly had done about the portfolio of the Banque de France in the context of what's called the Corporate Sector Purchase Program, which is some operation of quantitative easing that was launched by the European system of central banks, and then which led to the Banque de France to in particular publish the assets it had bought in this framework, and then you can classify okay, the portfolio of the Banque de France in this context in terms of exposure to climate policy sectors, and you can in particular compare this to a benchmark, etc. So how exposed in theory are you? Okay, and then, well, if you, okay, so then this is not going to work. If you want to do that at a broader scale, so for example, if you want to, so in the 2017 paper, we wanted to kind of stress test the European financial system, which was a bit an ambitious goal. Well, you can rely on some large-scale database for some type of asset. So here, in particular, equity, which is the easier thing to get. Okay, so you can reconstruct, for example, for either institutional sector or for individual bank. That's yeah, or individual. Let's say like that. Individual banks or individual investors. You can reconstruct, if you have relevant data, their exposure, for example, here in equity, to those different sectors. Okay? And hopefully you have more granular information, and so you can have a more granular representation of exposure. But at the end of the day, this is mainly a question of which data you have access to. It's not the most complicated part. The issue, and I think the point, in fact, has already been raised, the issue is how, in the discussion following the talk of Jean-François, the issue mostly is how you try to infer hazards, right? So in general, in quantitative finance or in financial risk management, you lose market data, you have a lot of high frequency data about the volatility, about the price of assets, and you take it from there. There are issues with the models, because the models are normal, whether the data is not necessarily normal, etc. But that's a less major problem than what you face here, because here, well, there are no empirical observation of the shocks for which you want a distribution. So, I mean, then you've got to be very pragmatic, right? So, I mean, you could use alternative approaches, right? You could start with some prior distribution on carbon prices and estimate the distribution of impact on the basis of levels of emission. Yes? Yeah. Fine. You could do things like what Pindike proposed in the context of climate risk, aggregate expert opinion and, let's say, infer probability distribution on the basis of expert opinion. What we did mostly for the moment is we use models, ensemble of models, so because, Michael, to answer part of your point, those people, they are comparing their models, okay, so there is some notion of comparability between the models. And so for certain scenarios, okay, thanks to the work of the IPCC in particular, so you have certain climate policy scenario for which you have an ensemble of models. And for this ensemble of models, you have ensemble of economic trajectories. Okay, so that's one of the approach mostly we followed. Okay, so which was the idea? Which was the following idea? If you have an ensemble of economic trajectories from an ensemble of, for a set of climate models corresponding to different climate policy scenarios. So you have a distribution of economic trajectory corresponding to different scenarios over time. And then we infer from that a distribution of potential shocks on economic revenues by considering that a shock was either a transition between two scenarios at a given point in time, or a longitudinal shock, which would be a shock, I don't have the slide here, a shock corresponding to the acceleration of the climate policy. So you would have, in terms of relative impact on revenues, an unexpected shock, which would correspond to making suddenly a 5-year step in such a model. Okay, this is cooking. I mean, there is no theory of that. But this seems a reasonable approach given the amount of the type of data you have, let's say. The theory being that if you want to back this up, you would consider that investors have a 5-year expectation, and then if there is a shift, okay, that is realized, then you look at the realization of the economic model 5 years ahead in terms of relative market share or relative distribution of revenues, and well, this would be a representation of the shock. Okay, so you have a distribution of economic shocks. Okay, so typically what you would get out of this sample of models is a shock on revenues for a certain type of sectors. Okay, and then you want to translate that into measures of vulnerability, which means so at first scale, what would be the impact on the value of the financial asset. Okay. So you have plenty of models to do that, the simplest of which I've put that, it would be, okay, if you have a shock, initially without, so you can look at the probability of default, okay, so that's one option. Here it's the probability of default. If you have a certain liability L, okay, normally you have a certain distribution of shocks without the climate part, well, which gives you a certain probability of default. And then for a given climate shock, well, this shifts your probability distribution by a certain amount corresponding to the shock, which is kind of an extra liability field, right? Yes, okay. If you have a distribution of such shocks, okay, you have a distribution of shocks, then you can fit them into any type of asset valuation model you want. It's not only the probability of default. You can use these Merton type of models they normally use in the financial industry, and so on and so forth, right? And so you have the impact on asset values, and then you would use risk measure like the value at risk or the conditional value at risk, which are basically quantiles of the distributions of impacts. So you can do that for one financial asset, you can do that for a portfolio, and to take it, and I think that's the last thing I'm going to say, you can do that also at the level of the financial system using network propagation mechanism, okay? In particular, Stefano had worked a lot on this issue. So where the idea is that given financial interconnection, the fact that a certain financial institution receives a shock, okay, implies that its balance sheet deteriorates. And if the balance sheet of the financial institution deteriorates, the value of the liabilities of this financial institution also decrease. Because if the financial institution has a deteriorated balance sheet, it has a higher probability of default, and then the value of the assets it emits also decreases, right? And if you look at the propagation of such shocks within financial networks, it's particular concern for financial institutions because they are highly leveraged, right? I mean, much more leveraged than a standard corporation. So then if you look at this propagation dynamics, you have, if you want, what we call second round effects. Okay, so you're going to have not only direct impact of shocks, okay, so here which are in dark, so for this kind of first exercise we had done in the 2017 paper, okay, you had also second round effects, which so this time depends not only, so first round effect depends on the composition of your portfolio as a financial institution, second round effect depend on the composition of the portfolio of who are your main counterparts in the financial industries. Okay, so I'm more or less it. I'm sorry I had to rush. I didn't have the good timing in mind. Take-home message is one. So those transition risks, they are relevant if under the working assumption that they are not currently evaluated or anticipated by the market. Big issue is that with respect to the normal practice in the financial industry, you need to integrate some estimate of a distribution of future risk, for which you have relatively few empirical data. So you, in fact, rely on expert advice. This expert being mainly expert advice, properly speaking, or economic models. And on this basis, you need to cover the three dimensions of risk, okay, exposure, hazard, and vulnerability. There are, modeling choice, at least with respect to vulnerability and to a certain extent with respect to hazards. And once you've done that, you can, the objective, so to say, at least I would say, the objective, if you want to be efficient with working with the financial industry on that, would be to try to translate the kind of information that has been produced in the community working on mitigation, mainly if you talk about transition risk, into the kind of tools they are used to, or the kind of information they are used to, which is distribution of shocks, basically. And that's mainly it. Yeah, there are couples of papers out, there are more, but yeah, I'm happy to give you additional references if you are interested.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Any questions? Yes. Just to be sure. Yes.
You need that.
Hi, thanks very much for this great presentation. So I know the work of you guys, well, your work and Betsy Stone a little bit. I think this is really excellent, partly because it's unique and nobody else is sort of doing it, or not many people, a few here. But one thing that I find in these bits of work that's missing, I always think, is time. Where is time? And the problem with time is, say, for example, if in 2019 somebody invests in a fossil fuel plant somewhere and expects return on that, in 2030, they're stuck with that plant with a lifetime much beyond that. And so even if people wanted to price in the risks, when they're stuck with high carbon capital, there's not a lot they can do other than just take a big loss when a change in the context happens. And so that I think increases vulnerability. It's enormous numbers of decisions taken in the recent past that then make the future become very much at risk.
Well, I mean, I think if I address your question from the point of view of a financial industry guy, I would say you saying the markets are illiquid, in a sense. Because so one of the first answers the people would give you to these kind of things initially is, we don't care, we have the time to get out. Okay? Of course, the issue is that you don't have the time to get out if everybody wants to get out at the same time. So for your party, so I mean, from the point of view of the financial industry, to say that, so I mean, here, the way, I mean, indeed, the time, if you want, in this type of work, the temporal dimension is translated into the shortfall, in the fall in asset value at the moment where the shock materializes. So you consider that you're going to be able to get rid of the asset, but at a cost. And but you need, I mean, at least in this mode of thinking, you need to have a price, or you need to have some kind of valuation of the asset to have a kind of consistency. And I think that's the way it's done, right? I mean, the balance sheet approach you would have, I mean, in terms of balance sheet where you have that particular asset on your balance sheet and you cannot get it out, this is outside this mindset, so to say.
Thank you. Any other questions? But the question needs to be short because we need to start on time.
Thank you very much, Antoine, for throwing your body on the barbed wire for the second time, you know.
I mean, the EHP has an insurance with me. I'm selling insurance to the EHP.
Yeah.
I can replace anybody. You know?
There was one thing that I didn't really understand when you had a formula. It's too bad that, you know, your thing is no longer up. Where you refer to a Merton model, etc., and you included this extra risk as in the limit of integration, where I would have expected it in the integrand. So could you just say something about that? Because it's related to the question about times.
No, this is, if you want, the integral is not about, it's not integrating the climate risk. This integral. So the integral initially that I had on the left is you have, so the shock, the epsilon, so for, a priori you have net of climate, well, very simply, net of climate, in each climate shock, you have A, and which is the expected value of your asset, and you have some variance on the shock, the epsilon, right? So that's your assets, and you have uncertainty about your assets, and you have a certain liability L, which is what you have, what you owe to your external counterpart, right? And you're going to be in default if the shock is such that you cannot cover your assets, right? So you're below L minus A, right? So your default, right? So that's your default probability in absence of climate shocks, right? Okay? And then if you have a climate shock of size k, I mean, it's really symbolic, huh? Then it's just like that, right? This is for a given shock, for one realization of a shock, right? So you have PD with a shock of k, right? Okay, and then you have that. And of course, what you are interested in, and that was not on the slide, is the distribution of this stuff. To go to the Merton or whatever, right? That's mostly.
I suggest to leave it there, and we'll have time over lunch and over the coffee break in order to discuss. Many thanks, Antoine.
Okay.